Okay, so I'm about to do the martial arts, yoga, and meditation routine in the opposite order, starting with the Tibetan Buddhist meditation. If you're following along so that you can build your own meaningful lifestyle, you can listen to my meditation that is taught by the nuns at Shravasti Abbey, or you can mute it and do your own meditation where you just sit. I like to have the exercises to practice. The mantra repetition and chanting will put you in a state of mind that induces flow states, which feels like it works. It feels like meditation progress. It feels like mastery of a skill. And it puts you in a state of feeling at one with the universe and yourself, the environment, people, plants, and animals. Um, Cultivating ethical standards and putting them into practice. So this whole thing is about putting into practice a martial arts lifestyle, and a lifestyle of self-love and meaning, and not just saying, oh, I believe this and I believe that. It's about doing. So we do some exercise, we do some stretching, prepares the body for meditation. We do the meditation. And these practices will make you happy, healthy, and able to create wealth in your life. So we're about to start. I'm going to play the meditation, and we will both listen along together here. After the meditation, we'll do the yoga. We're doing about 45 minutes of each thing. And after the yoga, we'll do the martial arts. While we practice the martial arts routine, we'll be listening to some meaningful lectures with music in the background.
We do the practices with this aspiration to be of benefit to beings, not to harm them, to benefit them, and in our understanding, the best benefit is to actually for beings to be liberated from cyclic existence, and we aim to become Buddhas in order to help beings to be free in this way. So generate those thoughts in your own way. So Venerable Chodron has laid out this sadhana for us, helping us to generate these various mind states. And she starts by having us think about all of our potential, all the kind of positive qualities that we can develop. Infinite love, compassion, wisdom, skillful means. So imagine what it would feel like to be those qualities. Just let yourself be love, be wisdom, try to feel the expansiveness and peace in your heart, the wisdom that it takes to have this kind heart, to be unencumbered in any way, vast and expansive. You can take in everything that's happening in this world, reaching out to every being, human and otherwise, to benefit each one. So now imagine that these qualities of love, compassion, wisdom, skillful means appear in front of you in the form of Shakyamuni Buddha. So imagine this Buddha in front of you, in the space in front of you made of radiant, transparent light. He's sitting on a throne, above which is an open lotus flower and cushions of the sun and moon discs. This entire visualization is made of radiant, transparent light, but you're imagining a living being with a light body. So you feel yourself in the presence of the Buddha. But Buddha's body is golden in color. He wears the robes of a monastic. His right hand, with the palm down, rests on his right knee. The earth-touching mudra. And his left hand is in his lap holding a bowl of nectar. And this nectar is the medicine to cure our afflictions and all of our hindrances. And the Buddha's face is very beautiful. You can look at the Buddha's eyes. He's smiling, his eyes are smiling. He's looking at you with total acceptance. And as he looks at you, he's also encompassing all sentient beings. The Buddha's eyes are very peaceful, long and narrow. His lips are red and his earlobes are long. Imagine rays of light radiating from every pore of the Buddha's body. This golden light going out to all the parts of the universe, touching beings, carrying miniature Buddhas to help beings. And as they complete their work, they dissolve back into the Buddha. The Buddha is surrounded by the entire lineage of spiritual teachers, all the meditational deities, innumerable other Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, Dakas, Dakinis, Dharma protectors. And at the side, near each spiritual mentor, is an elegant table, and on it are Dharma books. The sounds of the Dharma fill the air. And they're all so happy that we're here doing this together. Imagine their minds just blissful and peaceful, gazing at all sentient beings. So you imagine that actually you are surrounded by all sentient beings in human form. Your mother of this life is on your left. Your father of this life is on your right. Any people you have difficulty with, you imagine in front of you, facing the Buddha, keeping them there for protection. Family and friends are nearby. Countless strangers fill the space around you. And all of us are looking to the Buddha for guidance. So first we need to cultivate a sense of refuge. So we think of all the dangers of cyclic existence. Just think about how things are not secure. We run into dissatisfaction, often dukkha, often. And people, all the beings around us, all the sentient beings around us, are also in the same boat, floundering in cyclic existence. And many of them have not met any kind of teachings that will help them out of this quagmire. So we generate compassion. And now now think of the wonderful qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and generate this sense of confidence in them, in their ability to guide you out of all of these recurring problems. To take refuge, we need to cause this kind of concern, this kind of alarm, fear type, and also this confidence and faith and the compassion. So it is possible, on the basis of your present life and mind, to free yourself from all of these undesirable experiences. So resolve to explore that possibility to the fullest. Feel great trust and confidence in the three jewels, and open your heart to rely upon them to guide you and others from all of these difficulties of cyclic existence and bring us to the peace, liberation, and full awakening. So as we do these refuge verses, starting here, now we're on the top of page 21, we'll be taking refuge in the Buddha, and we imagine actually leading all of the sentient beings around us and going for refuge. And we visualize white, radiant light flowing from all of the Buddhas, the spiritual mentors, the Bodhisattvas, all of these holy beings flowing into us and all the beings around us. And this light completely purifies all of our destructive karmic imprints and afflictions. And it also brings all the realizations of the path. So put your hands in prayer position. Namo Guruvya. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dharmaya. Namo Sanghaya. 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 Namo Guruvya. So feel that you've come under the protection of the three jewels. And now we turn our thoughts to others and think about how much we depend on other beings for everything that we have, everything we know, everything we use, everything we enjoy. Our food, clothing, resources of every kind. These come due to the efforts of others. Our knowledge, talents, good qualities, these too are developed due to the kindness of others. And our ability to practice the Dharma certainly depends on others who brought the teachings to us over the millennia by generating realizations in their mind and teaching. So this is a very great kindness, all of these things we want to bring to mind. Our innermost wish is to be free from suffering. And this is the case for everyone else as well. We want to be happy, and all beings want to be happy. And like us, they encounter many difficulties, problems, sufferings, and usually actually their difficulties are more so than our own. Not always, but often. And when we examine our capacity to help beings, we find that we're actually quite limited. And we know from our practice that if we can reduce our anger, our attachment, our ignorance, our various faults, and if we can increase all of our good qualities, we're really going to be in a position to benefit beings. Imagine if we had just this generous heart that gives so easily, takes delight in giving, the kind of ethics that doesn't harm, has that just ingrained fortitude, loving kindness, compassion, wisdom. We'll be in excellent position to help beings by having our good qualities developed. And if we develop them fully, like a Buddha does, then we'll be able to be of the greatest benefit to beings. So we generate this altruistic intention in order to be able to benefit beings most effectively. So as we take refuge and generate bodhicitta, imagine that light is flowing into you from all of these Buddhas and holy beings. And it's flowing into you and all the sentient beings around you. So we're on the top of page 22. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by engaging in generosity, and the other far-reaching practices, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by engaging in generosity, and the other far-reaching practices, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by engaging in generosity, and the other far-reaching practices, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. So imagine the Buddha is so pleased with your altruistic intention. And a replica emerges from the Buddha, comes to the crown of your head, melts into golden light, flows into you. Feel that you and the Buddha have become inseparable. close to the Buddha, and allow your mind to be transformed and inspired. Let go of all conceptions you have about yourself. Let go of any self-denigrating thoughts. Let go of the concept of inherent existence and meditate on emptiness. At your heart appears a small Buddha made of light. He radiates the light of wisdom and compassion in all directions throughout the entire universe. And this light transforms all sentient beings into Buddhas and all environments into Pure Lands, which are places where all the circumstances are conducive to practicing the Dharma and generating realizations. So imagine this. You've transformed all sentient beings into Buddhas and all environments into Pure Lands. In your imagination, well, why hasn't this become a reality? We sentient beings have bias, prejudice, we lack love, compassion, and joy. So now we want to wish ourselves and others to have all of these qualities. So we contemplate the four immeasurables. We do this to reinforce our own felt experience of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity for everyone. Friends, strangers, enemies, relatives, people you don't like, people you don't trust, anyone, everyone. So as we say those four immeasurables, you want to listen to yourself say the words and contemplate as you recite. We'll pause between each of the four. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. So, in order to achieve what we've just been aspiring towards, we need to purify our negativities, and we need a lot of merit. We need to abandon things and adopt things. So when we do the 7-limb prayer, this encompasses all this abandoning and adopting of things. So we'll pause after each line. And you want to have your hands in the prayer position for this. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. So imagine yourself and all the beings, the sentient beings around you, making prostrations to all the holy beings in front of you in the field of merit, repeatedly prostrating. And represent clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. So imagine offering everything beautiful to the Buddha and all the holy beings. You can fill the sky with offerings, make it very lovely and beautiful. You can think of flowers and fields and just everything that you love. Offer to all the holy beings. You can do this repeatedly. I confess all my destructive actions accumulated since beginning this time. So now we do a glance meditation of the four permanent powers. So for this, bring to mind something that you wish to purify, some fault or mistake. Bring it clearly to mind and generate regret for that. And then the other permanent powers are taking refuge in generating bodhicitta, which we're doing in the practice. The practice itself will be the remedial action, but make a determination not to do this action again. And rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. So think of common sentient beings like ourselves, the holy beings, and delight and rejoice in all of the virtue created by any kind of being. Let go of any jealousy, envy, and just rejoice in the goodness in the world. Use your own life experience. Think of things, people that you want to rejoice. And then the next verse. Please remain until cyclic existence ends. So now we offer a double dorje. This symbolizes long life. We offer this to the holy beings. We do this requesting them to live long, to always be a part of our life. And you can do this multiple times in your imagination. And then the next verse. And turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. So again, make this offering. You're offering with both hands this beautiful 1,000-spoke Dharma wheel, golden in color. Offering this to the teachers and the Buddhas to guide you and to continue to teach the Dharma. And then the seventh one. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the Great Awakening. So now we steer these limbs toward full awakening for ourselves and all beings. And now we'll offer the mandala. Here we imagine everything beautiful in the universe, offering it to all the holy beings with the wish that they will continue to teach and guide us, and that we can generate realizations in our mind. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, for land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. The objects of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, friends, enemies, and strangers, my body, wealth, and enjoyments, I offer these without any sense of loss. Please accept them with pleasure and inspire me and others to be free from the three poisonous attitudes. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. So imagine all the holy beings are just delighted, and they receive your offerings. And the offerings melt into light and dissolve into them, and these all absorb into the Buddha's heart. And then immediately he radiates light back to you, filling your body and mind. And this light inspires you to accomplish the path to full awakening. So in order to progress along the path, we need to develop realizations. And in order to do this, we need the inspiration of the lineage of spiritual mentors, especially your principal teacher or your root guru, who is the one who has touched your heart deeply. If you don't have a specific teacher, just think about Shakyamuni Buddha, or maybe you have a connection in your mind with His holiness. And we make this request on page 25. Glorious and precious root guru, sit upon the lotus and moon seat on my crown, guiding me with your great kindness. Bestow upon me the attainments of your body, speech, and mind. And so then, at this point, you imagine that a replica of your teacher in the aspect of the Buddha emerges from the Buddha in front of you. And it comes to sit on a lotus and moon disc on the crown of your head, facing the same direction as you. So then this Buddha on the crown of your head is going to act as an advocate for you to request inspiration from the entire field of merit as we continue the request. And we're doing the long one on page 26. Buddha, unequal teacher and guide, venerable protector Maitreya, successor, superior Sangha prophesied by Buddha, to you three Buddhas and Bodhisattvas I make request. Buddha, head of the Shakya clan, the foremost guide, peerless in expounding emptiness, Manjushri, embodiment of the Buddha's complete wisdom, exalted Nagarjuna, best of the superiors who sees the profound meaning, to you three crowning jewels of clear exposition I make request. Atisha, upholder of this great vehicle, who sees the profundity of dependent arising, Drome Rinpoche, elucidator of this good path, to these two ornaments of the world I make request. Avalokiteshvara, great treasure of objectless compassion, Manjushri, masteress, flawless wisdom, Tsongkhapa, crown jewel of the snowy land sages, Losamdrapa, I make request at your feet. Holder of the white lotus, embodiment of all the conqueror's compassion, guide benefiting migrating beings in the land of snow mountains and beyond. Sole deity and refuge, Tenzin Gyatso, at your feet I make request. The eyes to whom the vast scriptures are seen, supreme doors for the fortunate who would cross over to spiritual freedom, illuminators whose wise means vibrate with compassion. To the entire line of spiritual mentors I make request. So imagine all of the figures in the field of merit melting into light and dissolving into you. Into the central figure of the Buddha in front of you. All the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Arhats, Dakas, Dakinis, Dharma protectors, all of these beings melt into light and dissolve into the central figure of Shakyamuni Buddha. And now Shakyamuni Buddha embodies the three jewels. And this Buddha absorbs into the Buddha on the crown of your head. And then as we recite the Buddha's mantra, try to let your mind be very open and receptive. Imagine this white light flowing into you from the Buddha on the crown of your head. It purifies all your negativities, all your obscurations, and it generates within you the realizations of the stages of the path. So we'll recite the Buddha's mantra together. Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamune Soha. 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 Now, re-establish the visualization of Shakyamuni Buddha above the crown of your head, made of golden, transparent, radiant light, a living being. And this Buddha melts into light and dissolves into you. Your body, speech, and mind become inseparable from those of the Buddha. The dedication prayers, starting on the page that we're on in the sadhana, which is 27. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Breathing meditation at the beginning of the session, I hope you hear.
Okay, so that's the Buddhist meditation. We're gonna do the yoga next. I gotta clean up the room. So there's a short break, but I'll stay streaming. I'm gonna go get some water because the cats drank out of my cup, so I gotta get a new cup. I have my pre-workout here, so when you're following along, you know, it's okay to drink caffeine and water, electrolytes, creatine during and before the practice. You should save protein shakes and snacks for afterwards. So just listen to this while you're watching and prepare to do the yoga where you are.
Is that a lot of your meaning-making machinery is not occurring at the level of your propositional knowledge, your beliefs and your assertions of which beliefs you adhere to. So he proposes instead, what we need to do is we need to look at Buddhism ultimately existentially. Now you remember, existentially has to do with these modes. He also invokes in, along with others, the distinction between the being mode and the having mode, and he proposes that Buddhism is remembering the being mode, and I've already talked about that in a previous video. And so he says, look, traditionally what the Buddha said, and now we're returning to what the Buddha said is in order to try and get more of what his enlightenment was about. Traditionally what the Buddha said is presented as the Four Noble Truths. These are four statements or propositions that are usually presented to our ears as claims to be believed. And that what makes you a Buddhist is if you believe them. The problem with this, of course, is that it is taking place at this very level that Batchelor argues we need to get beyond. It's not, of course, that people don't believe things within Buddhism. It's that what we've been talking about here, these processes of transformation, are taking place at the level of perspectival knowing, at the level of transforming of states of consciousness, and at the participatory level, transforming the fundamental machinery of the self, of the agent-arena relationship, and the modes of existence. So we need to understand these Four Noble Truths as things that could help afford the kind of transformation that we've been talking about. The point about these is not to believe them. The point about them is to get them to help you reenact the Buddha's enlightenment. If you're not doing that, if you cannot enact enlightenment, then you are not getting the Four Noble Truths. He proposes, therefore, that we should not call them the Four Noble Truths, we should call them the Four Ennobling Truths. I then proposed to him in person that we shouldn't even call them truths anymore, because truth is a property of propositions. Actually, I said what we should call them is the Four Ennobling Provocations. You're trying to provoke people into change. So, let me try and go through the Four Noble Truths, but restating them as four ennobling, enabling, affording self-transcendence provocations. By doing that, I think we can get back to, if that's the right verb, what the Buddha was conveying about what's going on in enlightenment. What kind of transformation is being brought about by the awakening experience? What is it alleviating? Okay, so let's go through these one by one. so I'll present the standard way of representing the truth and then the reformulation in order to deal with Batchelor's, I think, astute criticism, and in order to interconnect with all the argumentation we have been developing throughout this video series. So the first one is typically stated as all is suffering, or all of life is suffering. Now, that's first of all, if that were the statement to be believed, it's false. Because suffering is a comparative term, and comparative terms can't be extended to everything. Everybody likes saying everything is tall. Doesn't make any sense. Things are only tall relative to other things being shorter. So, first of all, it doesn't really mean all is. It's something more like all is threatened by. Well, what's the all? Everything in existence? Should we interpret it metaphysically? Well, I mentioned last time that we should be careful about giving metaphysical interpretations to what people bring out of these awakening experiences. And the Buddha himself was famously reticent to giving metaphysical interpretations to his statements. So let's try and follow that. In order to get at that, let's note what this word means. Okay? Because again, we tend to allow a word to go through a process of trivialization and reduction, and we've lost part of the meaning. Let me give you, first of all, an analogy. Okay, so the original meaning of this word is insane. But it has come to be synonymous with angry. I'm mad at Agnes. It doesn't mean I'm insane, right? It means that I'm angry at Agnes. How did that happen? Well, one of the ideas is anger is a state that can render you, if it becomes extreme anger can render you temporarily insane, and therefore temporarily mad. Anger is a cause, a pertinent cause of madness. Okay. So, suffering, people usually hear pain, distress, when they hear the word suffering. That person is suffering. But that's not actually what the word means. To suffer means to undergo. It means to lose agency. So you can actually suffer joy. You can have so much joy that you sort of have lost control of yourself. You can have so much pleasure. It is not oxymoronic to say, I'm suffering pleasure. I'm having so much pleasure that I sort of lost control of the situation. Right? Now, pain is a very powerful way of losing agency. Why? First of all, it's highly disruptive. And secondly, pain is associated usually with damage. And damage is a state in which we're often losing agency. So, right? Don't hear just pain. Buddha is not saying everything's painful. That's ridiculous, because if everything was painful, nothing would be painful. Even all of your experiences can be painful. Doesn't mean anything particularly, because many of your experiences can't be painful in and of themselves. Right? Because again, this isn't an absolute kind of claim. Instead, pay attention to this connection rather than this one. You remember, last video gave a parable of this suffering. It's the monkey that grabs and tries to free itself, and the other hand gets stuck in both paws and head, and then it gets killed. There's nothing in there of pain. Most of the Buddha's metaphors are not pain metaphors, they're entrapment metaphors. Being fettered, losing your freedom, losing your agency. That's why the Buddha doesn't describe enlightenment in terms of relief. But he would famously say, just like wherever you dip into the ocean, it has provocation. Realize that all of your life is threatened with a loss of freedom, a loss of agency. There's a word for this kind of loss that's often translated as suffering, which is dukkha. Dukkha, again, does not mean pain. What does dukkha mean? Well, the etymology is, imagine you have a wheel, and it's off-center on its axis. So the axle is not properly going to the center of the wheel, and as the wheel is turning, it's destroying itself. So there's a self-destructiveness. Or you have, your arm is out of joint, it's disjointed, like when Shakespeare has, Hamlet says the time is out of joint, right? It's out of joint, and as you're moving your arm, it's destroying itself. So it means like an empty gap that's sort of dirty, so that as things are moving within it, they're destroying themselves. So the idea of something that's engaged in a process of self-destruction, which of course is one of the powerful ways you can lose your agency, is through self-destructive processes, is what's going on here. So realize that all of your life is threatened, very really threatened, existentially threatened, by a capacity for self-destructive behavior. Self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. So now you see what he's doing is so situated very firmly within the Axial tradition. So what does he mean here? How can we try and understand this a little bit better? So this is work based on some stuff I've published with Leo Ferraro, and then I'll talk about some additional and important new work by Mark Lewis. I want to try and trace a kind of pattern in your cognitive processing that can very often occur. And the core of the argument I want to make is the very processes that make you adaptively intelligent, and we've been talking about this from the beginning, also make you vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. Okay, so let's say you encounter an event and you interpret the event as bad. Okay? Now, one of the adaptive machines you have is your brain immediately is trying to predict and anticipate other events like that. The point of you encountering something potentially even painful or distressing is not just to it's to make you sensitive in anticipating what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so your brain now tries to assess the probability of another event like this happening. Now, we'll get into this in more detail later, although we've talked a bit about it already with ideas about salience, is I can't take in all of the information available. If I was to try and calculate the actual probability of an event, I would have to track all the variables in my environment. That's astronomically vast. Even a supercomputer cannot possibly do this. Right? The thing is, when we do probability problems in school, we are given all the variables by stipulation. But the real world doesn't work that way. The real world has an indefinitely large set of variables interacting in an indefinitely large number of ways. So what do? Well, we use what are called heuristics. We use shortcuts that try and help us cut through and zero in on the relevant data, the relevant information. As we said before, zeroing in on relevant information is crucial. So one of the things we do is we use the representativeness heuristic. You judge how probable an event is by how prototypical it is, how salient it is, how much it stands out in your mind. Right? And that will often interact with another heuristic, the availability heuristic. This is, you judge how probable an event is by how easy you can remember a similar event occurring, or how easily you can imagine another event occurring. So these are actually very adaptive for you. Now the problem is you're in a bad state because you just had something bad happen to you. Now that triggers a thing called encoding specificity. When you're sad, it's very difficult for you to remember events in which you're happy. It's very easy for you to remember events in which you're sad. That's because your memory doesn't just store the facts, it stores all that perspectival participatory knowing. It also stores the state you're in. This leads to very sort of paradoxical things. If you lose your keys when you're drunk, one of the things you should do, if you want to get your keys back, is get drunk again, because chances are it will improve your memory. If you're studying for a test and you have a headache and you take some aspirin, when you're actually doing the test, take the aspirin, because it will improve your performance. I mean, so there's classic experiments on this. In one experiment, right, you have a bunch of people learning a set of words, right, in the same room, group A and group B, and then in the second part of the experiment, group A does it in the same room, group B does it in a different room. That's the only difference in them. Group A will remember a significant greater number of words than group B, just because they're in the same room. Okay? Now this is very adaptive. You may say, that's crazy. No, it's not. Because your brain is trying to always fit you to the environment. So it doesn't just store information, it stores how you were fitted to the environment or the context. It's very adaptive. So now what's happening here? Well, you're in a bad state, so it's easy for you to remember bad things. That means it's easy for you to remember bad things, and that means you judge the probability of bad things happening to be increasing. This bad thing just happened to you, so it's very salient. That makes you judge that it's much more probable it's going to happen, and these are reinforcing each other. Now, all of this is interacting with what's called the confirmation bias. We'll go over a lot more of this later when we talk about problem solving. What this is an adaptive strategy you use where you tend to only look for information that supports your current belief. Because very often trying to find disconfirmation takes too long and it's very difficult and complex. So we tend to look for what confirms. So now, the confirmation bias, now as I'm going through my memory and my imagination, I will tend to look for things that confirm my forming judgment that this event is highly probable. Now all of this machinery can go awry, right? All of these heuristics will mislead you. It's because of this heuristic that people make mistakes when they take loved ones to the airport and things like that, right? Because we can imagine planes falling from the sky, and when it does, it's very representative for us. People describe it as a tragedy, it's in the news, and so we judge airplane crashes to be highly probable, even though they're very low in probability. But then we turn and get into our automobile, which is the North American death machine, without paying any attention to it. So we misjudge probabilities because of these heuristics. Now, you can't do without them. It's like when we talked about hyperbolic discounting. You can't do without them. They're adaptive. You need them. Let's continue this. So these are all reinforcing each other. The confirmation bias. So now what do? You judge the probability to be great. Okay? Now notice how most of this is happening automatically in a self-organizing fashion. That's again because imagine if I had to do everything fully consciously. Okay, I'm going to pick up the cup. Now I need to start tensing my upper bicep. I need to start moving my... If I move everything, I couldn't pick up the cup. I need my cognition to be inherently self-organizing. We've seen that throughout. The way in which your processes need to be happening simultaneously, bottom up and top down. Like when you're doing reading, and you're reading both the letters and the words. Your cognition needs to be self-organizing. It needs to be largely automatic. These are adaptively indispensable for you. Okay, so you judge the probability is great. Well, what effect does that judgment have on you? It's not emotionally neutral. Okay, that makes you anxious. When your brain starts to conclude that the probability of negative events is high, you get anxiety. Well, what does anxiety do to you? Well, you lose cognitive flexibility. Your framing on things becomes very narrow, very rigid, very limited. What does that do? Well, that reduces your ability to solve problems. Ability to solve problems goes down. Okay, what does that do for you? Okay, as that goes down, you start to make lots of mistakes. And fail. What does that do? Well, of course, that increases your anxiety, and that reinforces, right, that bad events are happening to you. What does all that do? Well, all of this starts to gather in your mind as, I'm doomed. You get fatalistic. Well, if you're living in a fatalistic world, you're going to start interpreting more and more events, even neutral events, as bad. The whole thing starts to feed on itself. The very things that make you so intelligently adaptive, the fact that your cognition zeroes in on relevant information, makes it salient, the fact that it's so complex, capable of complexifying itself and organizing itself, the fact that it is trying to fit you to the environment and process information in a way that's doable within the real world. All these things that make you so adaptive simultaneously make you vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. That's what it means to say all of your life is threatened. Realize that all of your life is threatened by dukkha. It's not that everything you're doing is painful or distressing. That is ridiculous. That is a meaningless claim. It's that every process you're engaging, every time you're exercising your intelligent agency, you're making yourself vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive processing. We called this we published parasitic processing. It's not just about bad events. This is just one example. We get into all kinds of these spirals. We'll put up on the video a recent schema for what depression looks like. It was released by some MIT researchers. Very complex, like this. We call this parasitic processing because it's like a parasite, in that it takes up life within you and it takes life away from you. It causes you to lose your agency. It causes you to suffer. And here's what's important. This capacity for your cognitive brain to be self-organizing, heuristic using, complexifying, to create complex systems and functions with emergent abilities, has a downside to it. Look, this is what you know when you're in one of these spirals. You'll know it. Oh no, here I go. Oh no. Knowing it, what does it do for you? What does your belief do? It's like knowing that I should go outside the square. They go outside the box. It doesn't do anything. Why? This is a complex, self-organizing, adaptive system. If you try and intervene here, the rest of the system reorganizes itself around your attempted intervention. It can adapt and preserve itself as you try to destroy it. Why? Because it's making use of the very machinery by which you adapt and make use of the things that are trying to destroy you. That's how it works. No matter where I am, this is a perennial threat. No matter what I am doing, this is always liable to happen. Now what's interesting, as I said, my colleague and good friend Mark Lewis, we're talking about comparing this to other work that he's recently been doing. So some of you may know Mark Lewis. I highly recommend you take a look at his work. Mark has been deeply influential in my own thinking, ideas about dynamical processing, self-organizing systems development. He is one of the foremost important neuroscientists about addiction, how addiction works in the world. I strongly recommend reading his book, Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. So Mark was himself, I'm not disclosing anything confidential because it's right in the book, Mark was himself an addict in his youth, and then he overcame his addiction, then he went into neuroscience to try and figure out what is addiction, how does it work. Now, that's important because addiction, right, addiction is primarily the loss of agency. Right? It's not, addiction is distressing and painful, but when we're talking about somebody being addicted, the way we finally diagnose them is by how dysfunctional they become, how much they lose their agency. Right? So you are a video game addict if you are playing video games to the point where you cannot pursue the goals you want to pursue in your life. You cannot establish and cultivate the relations you want to establish in your life. You cannot cultivate the kind of character or identity you aspire to. If the video gaming is robbing you of those agentic processes, then of course that is what we mean by addiction. Addiction is a loss of agency. Now, when you take a look at Mark's work, Mark Lewis, he challenges. Right? I just saw him give a talk. I'm having lunch with him, but I also saw him have just a really good talk at the Society for Psychology and Philosophy, or Philosophy and Psychology, we'll get the order right, just this past year. And he was not the only person making this point, but he articulated it with his own particular explanation, which is his. So the point that many of people are making is the standard model of addiction is incorrect, fundamentally wrong. What's the standard model? The standard model is we have a biophysical chemical dependency, and when the chemical is removed, we get an overwhelming compulsion to have to seek out the chemical. And if we don't get the chemical, then we suffer, similar to as if we were starving from a lack of food. And so that's what addiction is. And the problem with this is it sounds very commonsensical, and the media likes it. It has the one unfortunate feature of being almost completely false. Because first of all, you can get addicted to processes that have no biochemical basis, like gambling, for example. Secondly, if the overwhelming compulsion model was correct, you have a great deal of difficulty explaining some very, very pertinent facts. Most people spontaneously give up their addiction in their 30s. We, of course, get focused on the people who remain addicted, and therefore we come to believe that addiction is an overwhelming compulsion. But if you actually track people, many people spontaneously stop being addicted. Here's a great historical example. You have soldiers in Vietnam during the Vietnam War getting addicted to opioids in Vietnam. The opioid crisis! Not that it isn't a crisis, but we tend to think that certain chemicals are intrinsically addictive. So, they get addicted to heroin. When they return to the United States, the vast majority of them spontaneously stop using the drug. But why? Chemical, not in the body. What's going on? Isn't there a biochemical lack and therefore a huge compulsion? Well, think about it. Think about it in terms of existential learning. See, when they were in Vietnam, they had a particular identity. You're a soldier, and they're in a particular arena, war. They're in a particular existential mode. When they return to the United States, they become a citizen, right, and a peaceful country. The relationship between the agent and the arena is what is fundamentally being altered in addiction. So Mark proposes a model that he calls reciprocal narrowing. So here's your agent, and here's the arena. And what happens is the drug use is associated with a particular agent-arena relationship. And what happens is, and we talked about this before, remember this is always co-identification. We're always assuming an identity and assigning identity in a co-defining, interdependent manner. What happens is, you start to lose a little bit of your cognitive flexibility, perhaps due to something like this. As you lose your cognitive flexibility, the number of options in the world starts to decline, right? As the number of options start to decline, you lose the variability for your agency. As you get a tighter, narrower, less flexible cognitive agency, the number of options in the world goes, and what happens is these two things reciprocally narrow to where you have no options as to who you could be or how the world should be. And that's addiction. It is a learned, not propositionally learned, perspectively, participatory learning of a loss of agency. I pointed out to Mark that if this is the case, there must be an opposite. If there's a spiral down, there must be a spiral up. And in personal communication, just recently, he said, yes, totally. And you know what that spiraling up would be. What would be the agent-arena relationship in which the agency and the world are expanding? That's anagoge. That's the move towards enlightenment. What I want you to understand is dukkha is these two things because they're interpenetrated. This loss of agency, because this is your agency. As you're simultaneously doing parasitic processing within, you're doing reciprocal narrowing without. Those are totally reinforcing each other. That's dukkha. And no matter where you turn, this is always threatened. You can't get free of it. You can't run away from it. You can't deny it. Remember the Buddha tried self-denial. This is like trying to hop over your shadow. You can't do it because it is endemic. All of this is endemic. This is the agent-arena relationship. You can't do away with this. This is indispensable to you being a person. This is self-organizing, relevance realizing, complexifying, processing. You can't get away from that because that is what makes you adaptive. So what do? That's what the Buddha meant. When you realize that all of your life is threatened by dukkha. He didn't need to believe that all of life is suffering. So, what we need is, how do we address this? Well, once you realize it as a provocation, the point is, you should feel threatened. You should feel threatened, because if I can make you feel threatened by what I've just done here, how close and intimate this threat is to you, then you're starting to enact the process of moving towards enlightenment, rather than just asserting some propositions that are largely inert. So, what's the standard way of presenting the second truth? Suffering is caused by desire. And that gets you into all kinds of problems. Because then, don't I desire enlightenment, but then you should not desire to, and you can just get into all these weird loops, and right? A better way of thinking about it is realize as a parasitic processing that has led to a reciprocal narrowing so that no alternatives are available to you. The third, the traditional presentation is the cessation of suffering is attainable. But realize, a better way of putting that is realize that you can recover your agency. Because this narrowing down can also, you can use the same machinery to anagogically ascend out of the cave towards the sun of enlightenment. Realize that this machinery, this complex machinery, this dynamical system can be exacted in a way that reduces your capacity for self-deception. Why? How? How do I address this? By a psychotechnology. The Buddha offered a psychotechnology of practices. Do you know how you deal with a complex dynamical system that is operating against you? By cultivating a counteractive dynamical system that is operating for you. You cultivate a dynamical system that doesn't intervene just here or here, one at a time, like your efforts. I'll try this, or that doesn't work, I'll try this. Because every time I intervene, it just reconfigures, and I'm doing the same damn thing again. Here I am in this fourth relationship, doing the same damn thing again. And I know I'm doing it, and yet when I try and not do it, I find myself doing it. That will not work. That's why people end up in therapy. But what if I could create a dynamical system that could intervene here, 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 simultaneously and in a coordinated fashion? What if I created a counteractive dynamical system that didn't operate just at the level of my beliefs, but operated at the level of my states of consciousness and my traits of character? That's what the Buddha offered. He offered the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is a counteractive dynamical system that counteracts parasitic processing and does reciprocal opening beyond the ego self and beyond the everyday world. Why it's represented by an 8-spoked wheel. It's supposed to be a self-organizing system that rolls itself, in which each part is interdependent on all the other parts. You might have heard it. The Eightfold Path is to cultivate right understanding, right thinking. There's various translations of this. Right? Sometimes right aspiration, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and then right mindfulness and right concentration. We already talked about this. Saying there's right mindfulness and right concentration means there's incorrect. One thing, this right is not moral righteousness. This is right like right-handedness. It means getting an optimal grip. Because that's what my right hand is an expert in doing. It means getting an optimal grip. Notice this is about your cognition. This, right, is about your character. And this is about your consciousness. And it deals with ethical aspects, existential aspects, sapiential aspects. It is the attempt to give you a counteractive dynamical system that can deal with parasitic processing and that can help you reverse the reciprocal narrowing until you get anagogic awakening. It takes you beyond the prison of the ego and the everyday world. So you see what's happening here? What I'm trying to show you is this higher state of consciousness, this awakening, is set into a context of helping you do important transformations. It helps you to remember the being mode to get out of modal confusion. It helps you counteract parasitical processing and reciprocal narrowing. It helps thereby to open you up to self-transcendence in a reliable and powerful way. This is what the Buddha was offering people. And I've tried to explain it to you in a way such that both you should feel threatened by what he is trying to provoke in you, and you should be encouraged. Both of these are enactment statements. You should be able to enact the threat and enact the courage, encouragement, enacting the courage, that you can respond to the parasitic processing and the reciprocal narrowing in your own life, to the modal confusion in your own life. Part of what we need to understand is how we can properly integrate this into what we've been learning about wisdom and meaning in the Mediterranean cultural historical context, and how all of that can be integrated within a current scientific worldview. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
You know, Akira. Have you heard of Akira the Don?
As probably following the sage advice of Batchelor, some of the Buddha's pronouncements, trying to get beyond interpreting his pronouncements as propositions to be believed, instead understand them as provocations so that we can enact enlightenment. And that means enacting the threat that we are facing, and then enacting the psychotechnologies that can respond to it. We'll take a look at this in terms of ideas of parasitic processing, reciprocal narrowing, addiction, the opposite of anagogic acceleration as opposed to reciprocal narrowing, and creating a counteractive dynamical system, the counteractive system of the Eightfold Path for successfully dealing with parasitic processing. So we saw that these higher states of consciousness, these awakening experiences, can bring about transformations that alleviate modal confusion, parasitic processing, reciprocal narrowing, many of the ways in which we fundamentally lose our agency in the world in a self-deceptive and self-destructive manner. I'd now like to return back to what's happening after the Axial Revolution in the West. So Socrates was fortunate. He had a great disciple in Plato. Plato was fortunate in that he had a great disciple in Aristotle. Aristotle had a great disciple, but he was not so fortunate. Aristotle's great disciple is not himself a great philosopher. He is another kind of great. He is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is an example of the kind of things that predate the Axial Revolution. The world conqueror. Alexander creates an empire and takes the Greek way of thinking throughout most of the known world in a way that reestablishes, in perhaps a dangerous manner, the pre-axial world. Alexander is so glorious that the line between being a human being and being a god is blurred. He creates a personal mythology in which he is a god-man, very much like the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, which might perhaps explain why Alexander was so readily welcomed into the courts of Egypt. Either way, what happens is a twisting of the world. Because not only does Alexander represent a return to a pre-axial way of being, he also represents a fundamental disruption to the world in which people have found themselves. Let's compare the world of Aristotle to the world of Alexander. Now, in order to do that, we have to understand that Alexander himself does not live very long. He dies in Babylon, most ancient cities. It's not clear what he dies of at a young age of 33. He has a child, but the child, of course, is too young and is therefore quickly killed. And his major generals fight amongst themselves, and they carve his empire up into 4 smaller empires that are perpetually at war with each other for about 300 years. So this period is known as the Hellenistic era. So if you're alive at the time of Aristotle, chances are you live, if you're Greek, part of the Greek culture, you live in a polis. This is where we get cosmopolitan from. It doesn't mean city, it means a city-state. Right? Like, for example, Athens and its surrounding agricultural supporting environment. Or Sparta. Now you know many of the other citizens. You know them face to face. We mentioned the idea that Athens is developing democracy. So when we discussed the sophists, at least for the adult males, and that's a significant defect in this society, but I've already gone into that. But you're participating in your government in a direct manner. You live close to, accessible to you, the seat of that government. You often know personally people involved in the government, sometimes even the leaders themselves. Everybody around you speaks your language. Everybody around you has ancestors like you yourself do, stretching back beyond memory, who have lived in this place. Everybody around you has the same religion. Everybody has basically the same allegiances to this place. See, your polis isn't just where you live. Your polis is like such a tight relationship between agent and arena that one of the greatest punishments you could suffer in this world, the world of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, is to be ostracized. Which is just, you're not killed, you're not imprisoned, you're not punished in any way. You're just told to leave the polis. And for many people, they would rather die or face imprisonment than be ostracized, because the polis was such an embedded existence for them. Their identity was so enmeshed in it. So see, look how deeply connected you are to yourself, to your environment, to the people around you, to your government, to your culture, to your history. Alexander comes and smashes all of that. Greek culture is now distributed into Africa, the Levant, into Asia, Asia Minor, Asia proper, right down out to the borders of India. You have Greek kingdoms, Bactria, that are integrating Greek culture with Buddhist philosophy and religion in what is modern-day Afghanistan. Now, what does this mean? Well, this means in the Hellenistic era, people are being moved around and shuffled around, and they belong to far-flung empires. You are now probably thousands of miles away from the seat of government. You do not participate in that government, nor do you know personally most of the people or any of the people in it. The people around you might not have lived where you're living very long. You might not be living where you've been living very long. Your ancestors might have been from Athens, and here you are dwelling in Asia Minor. The people around you speak different languages, worship different gods. Notice how all the connections are being lost. You don't have a connection to a polis. You don't have a connection to a shared linguistic group of any great extent, shared history, shared ancestry, shared religion. You're experiencing what Porteous and Smith, Brian Walsh called domicide. We'll come back to this later when we talk about the meaning crisis today. Domicide is the destruction of home. Now, there's two ways in which domicide can occur. One, of course, is physical destruction of your house, and that's important. But there's also cultural domicide, in which you have a house, you have a dwelling, but it is not very much your home. Now, we'll come back to this being unhomed, again, when we talk about our current situation. But notice how often we will use the language of loss of home to describe our current situation. We often talk about how we now feel unhomed in the cosmos. So people are experiencing this radical sense of domicide. They don't have deep connections to themselves, to each other, to their environment, to their history, to their cultural surroundings. They have very little political participation. They feel insignificant. You can go to sleep and you're part of the Ptolemaic Empire, and you wake up and you're part of the Seleucid Empire. So this is known as an age of anxiety, the Hellenistic period. The art changes. It becomes much more frenetic, becomes much more realistic, it becomes much more organized around sort of extremes and tragedy. The confidence that we saw in the earlier periods, period of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle is gone. Greece itself has suffered a titanic civil war, the Peloponnesian War. Sparta defeats Athens, the home of Socrates and Plato, one of the places where Aristotle did most of his work. Sparta is very quickly itself defeated by Thebes. Thebes very quickly loses its hegemony. So the Greek world loses until, of course, it's overwhelmed by Macedonia and Alexander. So, whereas the Greek culture is spread, the world is also thinned. It loses its depth. So, there's a change that starts to happen. You can see, as I said, in the art, the expression of this, you can see it in what starts to happen in religions. There's a lot of syncretism. People are trying to create religions that integrate different cultural deities together. A Greek deity, for example, and an Egyptian deity are integrated together, perhaps into Serapis or something like that. You also see the elevation of mother goddesses to pan-cultural importance, like the mother goddess Isis, because, of course, when you feel domicide, when you feel a loss of home, there is nothing that means home more to you than mother. And if you don't have that with your physical mother, what you want is some, divine mother that can make you feel at home no matter where you are in this fractured, domicile-laden world. But philosophy also responds. The axial age has left a powerful legacy. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And that project does not come to an end. But it does undergo transformation in the face of the Hellenistic meaning crisis. Up until now, the main thing that wisdom was trying to deal with was foolishness. That's not abandoned, but that's now seen as insufficient. So one of the great philosophers of the Hellenistic period is Epicurus. And Epicurus famously said, "Call no man a philosopher who has not alleviated the suffering of others." So there's now a therapeutic aspect to wisdom. Wisdom is now importantly about dealing with the anxiety and suffering that people are experiencing in the Hellenistic era. So a new model is created. So we've seen the idea, right, of the sage as somebody like Socrates who provokes the Axial Revolution, leads you out of the cave, all of these wonderful and powerful images and figures. But a new metaphor emerges. The philosopher is the physician of the soul. The philosopher is somebody who can cure you of existential suffering. This becomes crucial. Now, many of these new philosophical schools, the Epicureans, for example, and the Stoics, take it upon themselves to try to exemplify Socrates. Right? They try to exemplify Socrates. The Epicureans do this in a very unique way. They do this, and a useful way of analyzing their position is to take them up on their own metaphor. What is their diagnosis of the disease that is afflicting people, and what is their prognosis for the cure? Now, the Epicureans are very relevant to us because they, in some ways, represent a very secular alternative in the midst of what was still a very religious world. And that is pertinent to us. So the Epicureans diagnose that our main problem is fear. Now that's interesting, and there's something right about that, but we have to slow down first. And here's, in order to get closer about how we should try and appropriate what they're saying, the work of Paul Tillich here is especially useful, especially the work he does in his masterpiece, The Courage to Be. Although he does not talk about the Epicureans very much, he concentrates on the Stoics, as we will as well. He nevertheless brings up important distinctions. This is the distinction between fear and a word you heard me use more often, which is anxiety. Now these terms are often used interchangeably, and we also mix up the word anxiety with eagerness. We'll say, "I'm so anxious to see you tonight." That's horrible. You shouldn't be anxious to see somebody. That means you're distressed, right? And you're suffering a loss of agency, and you have a nebulous sense of threat. That person's terrified. What you mean is you're eager to see them. So first of all, give up that meaning of anxious. Secondly, we use these terms interchangeably. And, in everyday discourse, that's probably all right, because they do overlap in some ways, but they're important. It's important to at least talk about the polar differences between them. Fear is when you have an observable direct threat. If a tiger comes into this room, I experience fear.
So, did the meditation and the yoga, now martial arts. And I say this pretty much every time, so, hopefully you follow along, do your own practice. It's a pretty good routine, so I haven't changed it. It's better to train with other people, but you know, until I can get back in the gym, gotta have a daily home routine. So I start off with some basic body coordinations. It's 3 punches and a kick. And then just doing some kicks, doing boxing combos, then doing head movement for the core. So this is following a format of full body cardio, legs, upper body, core, over and over again, 4 different exercises, and then changing the exercises but following the same format for about 30 minutes. So, you know, after that, it's another body coordination. Then I'm gonna squat or lunge in a fighting stance and throw hooks for the legs. And then inside out block, like arm drag, right? And then hip throw exercise for the core. Then I'll get into some kickboxing, do more lunging and squats, throwing uppercuts, and then pummeling with the arms for the upper body, followed by high knees, right? Then doing some freestyle kickboxing and MMA drills, just shadow boxing, punch, kick, knee and elbow, shoot for takedown, shoot for hip throw, do some ground drills, followed by shooting for the takedown shot for the legs. Then a guard pass involving having your hands down for the upper body, and then armbar sit-up switch from the back. So it's an armbar drill. So that's just a few of the exercises, the first 4 sets. I'm gonna try to get through all of the technique exercises today. Yesterday I cut it short a little early because I haven't been doing it for a while and I had to get on the road. I started off late last night working, doing the routine. So right now I'm gonna get hydrated and caffeinated and really bang out these exercises, even if I have to just go through the motions for a few of them, because I am tired. I am out of shape. I might appear to be in shape for, you know, somebody who's a beginner or who hasn't really had a fitness lifestyle, but I know I'm out of shape and I can be in better shape, and that's the goal. So I'm gonna do this 30 minutes of martial arts exercise so that I can defend myself if I have to. And later, at the end of my work routine, I'm going to do some more regular just exercise, conditioning, strength, endurance conditioning, explosive speed and power movements. But I won't live stream that. That's going to be my own personal workout and not techniquing. So yeah, right now I'm going to continue playing this and sip on some pre-workout, you know, and maybe drink some more water and get ready to do this exercise.
Because I have an observable threat. In a very important sense, I know what to do. I may fail in doing it, but I know what to do. Okay? Anxiety is different. Anxiety is when the threat is nebulous. You're not quite sure what it is, and you're not sure what to do. You don't know what to do. So, very often, when you are suffering existential issues, you experience anxiety. This is why this is the preferred term used by Kierkegaard or Heidegger. Although Kierkegaard does use fear in one of his books. That has more to do with something else. So, the Epicureans are often translated, I think correctly, I'm not making a scholastic point, as talking about how we are suffering because we can't manage fear. I think a better way of understanding it, given this distinction and following on Tillich, is we suffer because we can't manage our anxiety. Because they think the fears they talk about are not really things that are a clear threat where we clearly know what to do. Okay. So, according to the Epicureans, basically we don't control our imagination and our thinking, and so we suffer from anxieties that cripple our ability to get a grip on the world. So let me give you one. Many people are anxious about death. In fact, sort of prototypically, people will often say, well, they'll often use the existence of death as a way of talking about how their life is ultimately meaningless. I'm going to die anyways. What does it matter? I'm going to die. And it's terrifying. I'm just afraid of death. And we know that if you expose people to triggers about their own mortality, they become cognitively rigid. They go into something very much like this parasitic processing. They get locked down, right? Now, there's a couple things you can do. You can pursue immortality. And of course, the religions of the ancient world and some versions of the modern world offer this. I have very little to say for this other than as a cognitive scientist, I think that is an utterly doomed strategy. The evidence that your mind and your consciousness are completely dependent and emergent from your brain is overwhelming. And one thing is indisputable, your brain dies. When your brain dies, your consciousness, your character, yourself die with it. I know that's even, I suppose, antithetical to what many Buddhists believe, but that's irrelevant. So I think the strategy of pursuing immortality is not going to work. It makes a fundamental confusion. It confuses something that's phenomenologically mysterious to you with making a conclusion. Look, I can't experience my own death. I can't imagine it because whenever I'm trying to imagine being dead, I'm still consciously aware. And so death is like, and therefore I conclude, well, there must be something about me that's immortal because it's inconceivable that I can't be at some level. But of course that's false. And that points to what the Epicureans talk about, right? They talk about, there's another strategy. Instead of trying to achieve immortality, can you radically accept your mortality? Because it's indisputable that you're going to die. Now, how do you do that? Well, first of all, realize that you can't possibly be anxious about your death. You say, yes, I am. Okay, well, give the Epicureans a chance. First of all, if what you mean by this your non-existence, and you say, I can't conceive of my non-existence. Well, okay, this is a standard move by Epicurus. But what about all of the world before you were born? You have trouble conceiving of that? No. Does it terrify you that you didn't exist then? No. So your non-existence isn't itself terrifying. And you say, but it's the loss. Well, the problem with that, the Epicureans would say, is that's equivocal. Do you mean, reduction, or do you mean the absence? And you mean, well, death is total loss. And then they say to you, you can't ever experience total loss. They famously said the following, where I am, death is not. Where death is, I am not. What that means is, if I'm aware that I'm losing, I'm still alive. And if I've lost everything, I've lost awareness. I can't be aware that I've lost everything. So that can't be what it means. Okay? So it means partial loss. So what you're actually afraid of is losing some of your agency. You're afraid of some of the reduction in your capacities as you're dying. is it you're actually afraid of? Well, the Epicureans say, you're afraid of losing what's good. Okay, well, what does that mean? So here's where the Epicureans, they are sort of very, very modern, right? They say, well, good is ultimately, something like pleasure, and they got associated with hedonism, and that's not quite right. But they don't mean pleasure in terms of bodily sensation. They mean pay attention to those things that actually give you the most meaning. Oh, okay. Now, what is it that really gives you meaning? Now, the things that we are most liable to lose as we age or as we're sick, we're liable to lose our fame, we're liable to lose our fortune, right? We're liable to lose our wealth. That's scary. But then they say, quite rightly, but those aren't the things that give you the most meaning in life. What is it that gives you the most meaning in life? And here's where the Epicureans have a beautiful answer. They pick it up from Socrates. The thing that gives you meaning is friendship. And they mean that very broadly. So they were unique in their community. They included women in it, not primarily for sexual relations, but they considered that the ability to obtain meaningful relationships was crucial.
My life has been nothing but failure.
And with those, meaningful relationships, not just the relationships, but being able to exercise philosophia, the pursuit of wisdom and self-transcendence. And the point is that as long as you are, that is always available to you. And that any of the pain you're suffering from the loss of any of these things is ultimately manageable by you. You can learn to manage it. Now, whether or not you ultimately agree with the Epicureans, right? Do you see what they're doing here? They're refusing to accept, I'm afraid of death. They're saying, wait. Are you? Do you really want immortality? What you're actually afraid of is losing your agency, which you've identified with these things, but that's not actually where your ultimate happiness lies. That as long as you have cognitive agency, you can cultivate philosophical friendship. Epicurus did this right to his very last moment, even though suffering from some horrible stomach. He exemplified what he was talking about, such that when you die, it doesn't matter. So, his disciples, and Epicurus had other ways. He tried to get us to not be anxious about the gods, right? Famously crafting some of the first arguments that are used by modern day atheists against, being concerned about the gods. I wouldn't say Epicurus was an atheist. He's a non-theist. He basically argues that the gods are irrelevant. And therefore, paying attention to them or being overly concerned with them, being anxious about them and their nebulous threat is not something you should rationally do. So, Epicurus' disciples would practice internalizing Epicurus. They would write his sentences on their household walls, on their household utensils. They would practice. They would form communities together where they would reinforce all of these practices, where you constantly train in being able to accept your mortality. Now, I think this is valuable to us. And I think one of the things that any wisdom tradition should do is give us a way of responding to our mortality. I would recommend that project doesn't stop. I recommend Tillich's book, The Courage to Be, as a discussion about that from a more modern context. And as I said to you, we are not caught by the usual framing, right? Either you believe in an afterlife or your current life is meaningless. Instead, the Epicureans say there's an alternative strategy, there's an alternative therapy dealing with the anxiety, and that is by learning how, not just learning beliefs, but learning how to live in the acceptance of your mortality. Now, while I think this is relevant, I don't think that their diagnosis is sufficient. I do not think that the meaning crisis of the Hellenistic period was driven primarily or solely by a fear of mortality. Why? Because mortality has always been with us and always will be with us. I think they're right that periods of chaos and nomicide exacerbate. We know this from mortality salience research, right? Things that are making us feel more vulnerable tend to make our mortality and our terror around it more salient to us. But I think there's another school that gets a better understanding of what was going on in the Hellenistic period and gives a more comprehensive answer. And this is the Stoic school. Now, Stoicism is very relevant because Stoicism is a direct and explicit ancestor to some of our current forms of psychotherapy. The current forms of psychotherapy that are the most evidence-based for being effective, the cognitive therapies like cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive therapy, etc., directly come out of Stoicism. Read Aaron Beck's book, for example, on cognitive therapy. He repeatedly states this and cites Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and others. So the way we are trying to deal with issues of anxiety, and if you probably noticed, we have an anxiety depression crisis in our culture, is we are very much putting into practice things that originated with the Stoics. Not as much from the Epicureans. So that means the Stoics have a different diagnosis of the problem and a different prognosis for the answer. So what's their issue? They also believe we're suffering from a kind of anxiety, a kind of suffering of a loss of agency and the distress around that, because that's, of course, what's shared by all of these schools confronting the Hellenistic crisis, meaning crisis of domicile. But they have a different interpretation of it. Now, we have to do a bit of history. There's quite a bit more history that comes directly out of Socrates and flows into Stoicism. I want to go over this a little bit carefully with you. So, we have Socrates, and we know one of his greatest disciples is Plato, but he has another one, Antisthenes. Plato wrote dialogues.
Okay, so I just wrote out some exercises. This is what I'm about to do. You can take a screenshot, flip the image around, but the top part is high intensity interval training workout, full body cardio, legs, upper body, core. Each of these is a martial arts exercise or routine or drill. These are the boxing combos I'm going to practice here when I do boxing and here when I do freestyle. So that's what I'm about to do for the next 30 to 45 minutes. Depending on how I feel, I'm a little bit out of shape. I'm not claiming to be any kind of expert. I just do this for self-defense and exercise. there's no substitute for training with another person. So I'm going to put on this lecture music and start working out. I invite you to join me.
Because he was trying to get us to emulate and eventually internalize Socratic and Lycus, that question and answer process that Socrates made famous. When Antisthenes was asked what he had learned from Socrates, he didn't argue, he just simply stated, he didn't make an argument, he just simply stated that he learned how to converse with himself. Now, that sounds like, well, I talk to myself all day long. Okay, so that's exactly the thing. This doesn't mean, right, your internal, just talking to yourself, it doesn't really, and the problem with that is that talking to yourself is often what goes seriously awry in anxiety and depression. This is what psychologists and psychotherapists mean by rumination. When that talking to yourself gets caught up in those parasitic processing spirals and it just spins out of control. And Antisthenes means something else. He learned to do with himself what Socrates was able to do with him. He really learned how to internalize Socrates. So although the Epicureans, right, pattern themselves on Socrates, they come out of Socrates, right, the Stoicism is really something close to being a religion that's trying to internalize Socrates. So that Socrates is basically, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, because the Stoics certainly wouldn't, Socrates is turned into a systematic set of psychotechnologies that you internalize into your metacognition. So, what became crucial for Plato, as we saw, was argumentation. But for Antisthenes, the actual confrontation with Socrates was more important. Both Plato and Antisthenes are interested in the transformation that Socrates is supporting. Plato sees this happening through argumentation. Antisthenes sees it as happening through confrontation. And you can see how they're both right. Because in Socratic and Lycus, Socrates comes up and he argues with you, but of course he's also confronting you. We talked about how he's sort of slamming the actual revolution into your face. So, Antisthenes has a follower, Diogenes, and Diogenes epitomizes this confrontation. And by looking at the kinds of confrontation, we can start to see what the followers of Antisthenes are doing. So, Diogenes basically does something analogous to provocative performance art. It gets in your face in a way that tries to provoke you to realization, those kinds of insights that will challenge you. He tries to basically create aporia in you, that shock experience that you have when confronting Socrates that challenges you to radically transform your life. But instead of using argumentation and discussion as Socrates did, as Plato picked up on, they were really trying to hone in on how to try to be as provocative as possible. So, famously, you know about one of these. It became a card in the tarot, and it became an album cover for Led Zeppelin. You have the man, right, with the lamp, wandering about, the hermit with the lamp. Well, this is Diogenes. He walked into the marketplace carrying around the lamp and looking and looking and looking and looking. And everybody said, well, what are you looking for? And he just kept looking and looking. What are you looking for? What is it? What is it? And he said, I'm looking for one honest man. And everybody got pissed off at him because they were so intrigued by all this looking and questing, and then when it becomes something that, right, and they're pissed off because they know he's right because they're in the marketplace and everybody's lying and cheating and stealing, right? But they don't want to know that. They don't want to pay attention to that. Now, that sounds sort of, yeah, that's kind of cool and courageous. Yeah, but Diogenes does other things you might not find so cool or courageous. Well, they're courageous, but they're not, you don't find that cool. Diogenes also famously came into the center of the marketplace and masturbated in public. And we're all going like, ew, right? How are these two things possibly related? Well, here's how they're related. Right? The group of people that start to take shape in this tradition are called the Cynics. It's not our modern meaning of the word. So I'm going to use capital C because this just means, being suspicious that everybody has an ulterior motive or a secret agenda. That's not what is meant here. This means actually living like a dog because Diogenes also famously lived outside of Athens, in Beryl. So let me tell you one more story, and then we'll try to connect all of them. So Alexander, the future emperor of the world, on his ascendance into godhood, comes to visit Diogenes. So you can imagine, here's the whole, all of this entourage, and here comes Alexander to visit Diogenes, and he comes up to Diogenes and he says, I can give you half the world. What do you want?
Skipped one. Yeah,
And
catch
all
that.
Diogenes says is, if you move a little to the left, you're blocking myself up. So why is he living in a barrel? Why is that his answer to Alexander? Why does he look for one honest man? Why does he masturbate? Like, what is going on? Well, the Cynics had a particular understanding of the Hellenistic domicile. They had the idea that what causes us to suffer isn't what we set our heart on. It's not just the particular that we set our heart on our life, we're afraid of losing it in death. We can set our heart on all kinds of things that ultimately will cause us to suffer. Why? Well, their idea is when we set our hearts on the wrong things, those things will fail us, and that's how we suffer. You can see some similarities to some aspects of Buddhism and to some of the asceticism that the Buddha first practiced himself. So the Cynics came to the conclusion that what the Hellenistic period was showing is that many of the things that we take for granted, think about what that would mean. We take them as being part of the structure of reality, are actually not fundamentally real. They don't have staying power. They're not permanent. They're actually man-made. They are historically, culturally dependent, and they are temporary. And when we set ourselves on these things, the current of events can easily and readily wash them away, and then we are left bereft. Our hearts are torn from us, and that is how we experience domicile. Okay, so what should we do then? Well, you should learn, not just acquire a set of beliefs. Diogenes isn't just believing things, he's living in a certain place in a certain way. Right? You should learn how to set your heart on the kinds of things that are not man-made, are not contingent, that will not be swept away by events. What are those kinds of things? Well, one are the laws of the natural world. So this is why Diogenes lives in a barrel. He wants to live as much as he can like an animal, in one sense. In another sense, he doesn't want to live like an animal at all. But he wants to live as much by natural law as opposed to man-made law. He doesn't want to be invested in man-made cultural institutions or practices, cultural, political value systems, because those will end. And then if we have set our heart upon them, our hearts will be broken. So So you want to, as much as you can, live according to the patterns of nature, because those are not man-made, and those will not disappear with the change in history and culture. Now, if it was just that, then of course Diogenes would just live like an animal. But the Cynics also said, in addition to natural law, there are moral laws. Are moral laws as to what is a proper way to be a good human being. Now, you may say, but isn't that all culturally relative? And of course, that's a big dispute. But one of the things that the Cynics did was to try and make a distinction between moral principles that are culturally based, moral principles that are not culturally based, and purity codes that are culturally historically based. And they are similar to each other in ways such that we can often confuse them together. So, a good way of understanding this is in terms of more modern language of guilt versus shame. Now, again, we use these terms interchangeably, and we should, because having a distinction between them is useful. Guilt is your distress at having realized you've broken a moral principle. Shame is your distress at having violated a purity code. Let me give you an example. As I was delivering this video, there was some sort of malfunction in my clothing, and my clothing suddenly fell down. I would be deeply embarrassed. I would feel shame. Why? Because I violated a code, a cultural code, which is I'm supposed to be fully clothed in public discourse, and I am. Right? But if that happened, have I done anything immoral? People would say, no, you didn't do anything immoral, you didn't do anything wrong. So I don't feel guilt, I feel shame. Sometimes they can be against each other, right? You may be made to feel ashamed, even though you're doing something that you believe, I'd say in a justified way, is morally right. Many people who supported blacks during the civil rights movement were subjected to terrific amounts of shaming, even though they didn't experience any guilt in what they were doing. See, purity codes are designed to keep the categorical boundaries that make a culture in a particular historical period run the way it's running. They are highly tied up with the invested power structures who are usually highly invested in things running the way they're running. So we have lots of important boundaries that are protected by purity codes. So for example, just to give you one more example, just to make it clear, none of you I hope would be distressed by me doing the following. Here's some water. Okay? Imagine if I do the following. I collect lots of saliva in my mouth. Lots of it, just tons and tons of saliva. And then I spit it into the glass. Until there's gobs and gobs of saliva in my glass. Now I swirl it around, just imagine it. Come on. And I drink it. And now you're going, ew. Now notice, if I mix the water inside my mouth and swallow, you're fine with that. But if the saliva comes outside of my mouth into the glass, you find it repellent. Okay? That's because there's an important purity code here. The purity code is, this is the boundary of John, and things inside this are John, and pieces of John should not come out into the world. John should not spit, John should not fart, John should not burp, John should not cut his fingernails off and leave them in front of you. John should even not leave his bed unmade because he's leaving his impression behind. And that's yucky. Okay, that's a purity code. moral judgment that should be based on reasoning and evidence. Please listen to me very carefully with what I want to say. First of all, I'll give you something uncontroversial. Both of my parents are dead, but suppose they were alive. I don't want to see them having sex. I don't. I would go, ew. Is that a moral argument? Of course not. Nothing immoral with them having sex. That's why I'm here. In a similar way, and please hear what I'm saying, I might not want to see two men having sex. That doesn't mean that that is any way a moral judgment on my part. A lot of the ways we have persecuted gay people is because we have confused a purity code disgust reaction with a legitimate moral argument. People who started the process, and we're still pulling them apart today, right now, right here, right now, were the cynics. What Diogenes was trying to do was get you to pull apart the moral code from the purity code. He did nothing immoral by masturbating in public. But although lots of people were doing stuff that was culturally acceptable in the marketplace, most of it was immoral. You see? Alexander comes to him and offers him power and fame. Those are all the things the Stoics say are no good. The Cynics say are no good because if you set your hearts on them, those are man-made, human-defined, and therefore your heart will eventually be broken. Set your heart on what won't get broken. So, the Cynics developed this very powerful, provocative way of enacting Socrates and trying to get us, the Cynics are trying to get us to realize what we're setting our heart on and to pull apart our automatic disgust reactions from moral reflection on what we're doing. Now, Diogenes has a disciple Crates, and then Crates has a disciple Zeno. This is not the Zeno of Zeno's paradoxes. It's a different Zeno. Now, whereas the Cynics tended to be sort of hostile to Plato because of his emphasis on argumentation, Zeno was deeply influenced by the Cynics, but he also really liked Plato. He felt that there was value in the argumentation. And he realized that there's deep connections between your ability to rationally reflect and your ability to use your reason. So what he wanted to do was integrate the rational argumentation and reasoning of Plato with, the provocative aspects of the Cynics. So he crafted a way of life that put the two together, and then he would walk up and down a stoa. This is a covered colonnade in Athens, teaching this new integration. That's where we get the name Stoic from. Stoic doesn't mean being, stiff upper lip and tolerating the decline of the British Empire or stuff like that. It means something much more sophisticated. So Zeno's insight was there's something deeply right about the Cynics, but they're getting something wrong. Right? They're concentrating too much on the product and not enough on the process. Right? They're concentrating too much on what we're attaching our heart to rather than the very process of attachment itself. Because the Stoics said, yes, particular cultures and history are variable, but being social isn't. Human beings are inherently social. Yes, particular political, cultural, and historical institutions and traditions are variable, but it is part of our humanity to be social. We shouldn't be leaving the polis. Because notice that Diogenes and Socrates have to actually enter the polis to practice their philosophy. So, Zeno said, it's not what you set your heart on, it's how you set your heart. And this is always a hallmark of rationality. One of the crucial, and this is good, like even recent work on rationality, Keith Stanovich, and the hallmark of rationality is learning not to focus just on the products of your cognition, but find valuable and pay attention to the processes. What process? What is this process of setting your heart on? Well, it's something we've already talked about. It's this process of co-identification. It's the process by which the agent-arena relationship is set up. It's the process by which you're simultaneously assuming an identity and assigning an identity. And you're doing that all the time, unconsciously. Now, the Stoics say, that process of co-identification is where your identity is being formed. That's where your agency is taking shape. But if you mindlessly co-identify, if you do it automatically and reactively, you will, if you'll allow me the acronym, you'll mar that whole process. You'll be open to all kinds of distortion, self-deception, self-destruction. See here again the axial age ideas. So, what do we need to do? Well, we need to pay attention to this process. We need to pay attention to how we're assuming and assigning identities. We need to do it in such a way that we can strengthen our agency in the face of the threat of domicile. So, what I want to explore with you next time is what do the Stoics actually advocate as practices, and how are these currently being taken up in our own psychotherapeutic endeavors to deal with our own version of domicile and crisis. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Very much, very much, very much, very much, very much.
Make some noise for Vicky John, out of here at the dawn. Meaning Crisis and Chill. Next week on Meaning Crisis and Chill.
Marcus Aurelius and Jesus. If that ain't an epic lineup. Yo, if that don't get you jumping in the bit, if that don't get you queuing up from dusk till dawn to get tickets, I don't know what will. Marcus Aurelius and Jesus. Next week on Meeting Crisis and Chill. How's this if I have domesticide? Man like gaming with Leo, what's up baby, says damn. Next week about to be the biggest banger. What excuses people gonna scalp tickets for the next one? Yo, be Athena. Marcus Aurelius was a real one though. Yo. Full kiddo, what's up? Everybody, what's up? How is that for you? You can spark up a cigarette now if that's your vibe, you know what I mean? You can spark up a cigarette or you can spark up a metaphorical cigarette, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? We just finished making love, so to speak. Now we get to talk about it. Hey. Yo, whoa. Number one gym fan says, when is the next test? I need to take better notes. Via Venus is a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger, John. A cliffhanger indeed. Boy, this says thank you, Sensei JV. Yo, so what was everybody's main takeaways from that? What did you take away from that was useful? Maybe there was something that wasn't useful, I don't know. No Skeptic Rise. Just did some DJing. Congratulations, baby. Feels good.
It's not what you set your heart on, it's how you set your heart. When John B said that, I was like, damn! Never, it's real. Ooh. It's not what you set your heart on. It's not what you set your heart on. It's how you set your
Three more
heart.
sets.
Yeah, that was one of them bits I remember when I first listened to this and I was cruising around in an e-scooter. It's one of the bits that made me nearly get killed. And that guilt shame shit. Yo, that shit nearly got me killed as well. Cruising around on an e-scooter listening to this shit trying to take notes. Yo. Be Athena says that was a bar. Yo! So many bars. So many bars! In this series. In this series. I know we do not have to agree with everything and every interpretation. That is the point. That is why here in the Meeting Wave Autonomous Zone, we have this kaleidoscope of minds through which to observe. We all these minds, they all observe in the same phenomenon from a slightly different angle, you know. Sometimes quite a different angle, sometimes from all the way over yonder. You know what I mean? Sometimes from all the way over that direction. And of course, what we aim at here is for you to be able to see the full picture from each of these angles. No one man has all the keys. And there are many rooms in the mansion. Yeah! Be Athena says the purity and morality codes give me something to chew on. I mean, that's a big part of what's going on now. I mean, again, it's been interesting observing the rise of this latest kind of societal meme, which really got swinging and kicking in the comics industry first, you know. And now they're just straight up purity testing everybody in that industry. They're doing it across industries now, of course, it's got everywhere, but that's very much what they're doing. You know, that's what the Gina Carano thing was, that she failed the purity test. They came purity test and pew, pew, pew. Thank you, as a traffic radio, God bless you. Pew. They came purity testing her. They said, yo, put your thing in the bio. That's a purity test. If you do not put your thing in the bio, you fail the purity test. And then you are marked. You know what I mean? You are marked. Like you smeared some ghost blood or whatever on your door. They're gonna come knocking and they gonna keep knocking until they kick your door in. By Joe.
But it also involves an ability to scale up, to move from feature to gestalt, and to go from looking at something to looking more deeply into reality. And that in mindfulness meditation, we're practicing the scaling down to break inappropriate framing and scaling up to train making better framing. And that if we can optimize by learning how to fluently flow between the two, bringing in an aspect of fluency and flow that we've already talked about, then we could optimize our capacity for much more comprehensive insight, and we could take it, if we could take it to the depths of ourself, like we do in the pure consciousness event, and the depths of reality into resonant enwonment, if we could integrate those, optimize between them, we could bring about prajna, a kind of non-duality that would be potentially transformative of the whole agent-arena relationship, dissipate modal confusion, enhance meaning in life by bringing about one of the most powerful kinds of mystical experience, give people a sense of enhanced realness that will challenge, encourage, and empower them to transform all of their existence and bring about tremendous increase in meaning in life. Talked about some recent cognitive science, including some of my own theoretical and experimental work that seems to be supporting the claim that these higher states of consciousness can bring about these quantum changes, these radical kind of transformative experience. So today I want to talk about that. I want to talk about transformative experience and the pivotal and really brilliant work of L.A. Paul on the notion of transformative experience. But before I do that, we have to step back and talk a little bit about altered states of consciousness. We have to talk a little bit about what we mean by an altered state of consciousness, what we mean by this kind of transformation. And that gets us into one of the most difficult problems. David Chalmers famously called it the hard problem of consciousness. Arthur Schopenhauer called it the world knot. Trying to explain consciousness is like trying to explain God. Right? It is one of the hardest problems. I'm not going to endeavor to do all of that, although I'm going to try and make use of some of the work that myself and Anderson Todd and Richard Wu have put into trying to understand at least some of the important functions and properties of consciousness and why altered states of consciousness can be so affording of radical transformative experience. So one way to do this is to look at two sort of questions we can ask ourselves. One is, what is consciousness? How does something like consciousness emerge out of the brain? That's sort of the nature of consciousness. And a lot of people are doing a lot of work on that. And then we can also ask questions about what's the function of consciousness? What does consciousness do? Those aren't the same question, because you may be surprised to hear that we don't have a consensus on what consciousness does. Most people know that consciousness is a mystery, but most people don't realize that what consciousness does is also a mystery. I mean, think about it this way. You love your consciousness. You identify with it. You don't know your consciousness the way you know other things. You know your consciousness by being conscious. Like if I ask you if you're conscious right now, you are. How did you do that? You just are conscious, and you know that you're conscious. Knowing and being, remember Aristotle conformity, right, are the same. You participate in your consciousness. But and what would you give it up for? What if I said to you, you could have unlimited power and wealth? All you have to sacrifice is any consciousness of it. Would you take the deal? Of course not. But what does it do? What do you say about, no, it's not obvious. Because you can do, and you do most of your things without consciousness. I have no understanding, no conscious awareness, I should say, that's some scientific understanding. I have no conscious awareness of what my brain is doing that is allowing me to generate speech. Do you? You don't. This complex, sophisticated thing that we still can't get artificial intelligence to do well, it's happening almost completely unconsciously. What's my consciousness for? So, two really important questions. How does something as mysterious and strange arise out of matter? That's the nature question. And what does it do? Again, I am not going to presume or dare to try and answer these comprehensively. I don't need that for what we're doing here. Because I'm not trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness. I'm trying to solve the hard problem of meaning. One hard problem at a time, please. But what I want to do is show you how a divergence of work, that some of the best work that's being done on consciousness, points towards something that will tell us why altered states of consciousness can be so valuable to us. So one of the best accounts for the function of consciousness is called the global workspace theory. So the idea is that your consciousness functions very much like the desktop of your computer. So here's the idea. You have your desktop, and then you have all your files. Right? And what you can do is you can activate a file. You can bring that information into the desktop, and you can activate this file and bring it into the desktop. And then these pieces of information can interact with each other, and then you can broadcast back to any or all or just one file the changes you brought about. That's how your desktop works. That's how you use it. Well, what's the analogy? The analogy is, here's all of your unconscious processing in your brain, And what you do is you retrieve it, bring it into a space, something like working memory. You activate it so that the pieces of information can interact with each other, and then you broadcast it back, right, to any and all of the existing files. Why do you want to do that? Why do you do it on your computer? Well, you don't want all of your files active at the same time because that's a disaster. You want to be able, and notice what's going on here, you want to be able to select certain pieces of information that are relevant, bring them together, transform them in a way that's relevant, and then broadcast the changes back that are needed. So the global workspace theory says this is, and it's gaining a lot of empirical evidence to support it, says this is what consciousness is functioning to do. Now this is very general. So more specifically, and so this theory is associated with Bars, and then there was a paper by Bars, Shanahan and Bars, that more specifically tried to answer the question about, yeah, but why this machinery? Bars also published an attempt to answer that question more specifically in the Cambridge Handbook of Consciousness. What it comes down to is the idea that what this architecture is helping to do is to solve a problem that's called the frame problem. Now, I'm going to talk much later specifically what the frame problem is, to put a pin in it, we're going to come back to it. But the basic idea here is, what this is doing is helping you to zero in on relevant information. And that's very, very important, because there are sort of three areas in which this is a huge issue. One is all of the information that's available to me right now. We're going to have to talk about this later, but technically, mathematically, the amount of information that's available in this room is astronomically vast. And I can't make use of all of it. I get overwhelmed by it. So part of what I have to do is select out of all of that information, what information I'm going to make use of. I also have a huge amount of information in my memory. Overwhelming, it's vast, and the possible ways it can be connected. I have to select from some of that. And then I have to put those pieces of information together, and all the ways I can put together the information from out there, the information about here, also vast and overwhelming. Later on, I'm going to give you mathematical arguments about this. Right now, I just need you to get it intuitively. So what consciousness is doing, right, is it's helping these problems. It's helping you zero in on the relevant information. Relevant information from out there, the relevant information from in here, and the relevant information that will help put those pieces of information together for you in the way that is needed.
So we'll stop on that note there. Your everyday consciousness filters out more than it lets in. So yeah, I didn't do all the exercises because I started to make mistakes, and that's when injuries tend to happen. So I stopped. And I'm gonna exercise later. While I'm at work, I'll be exercising at work, basically. So yeah, again, thank you for watching. Thank you for rewatching. Smash that like, share, and subscribe buttons. And do your best to do your own variation of this kind of routine every day. You've got your emotional, psychological, spiritual practice, your mental practice, mental hygiene. Then you have the yoga, which is the union of these things, the physical and the spiritual, or the physical and the mental. And then you have the martial arts practice. So you defend your practice, you defend your loved ones, you defend yourself. And you have the tools to do that. So, again, I advise that you find a teacher, whether you want to seek me out or if you want to find a local teacher, you need a teacher for martial arts, meditation, and yoga. You really do. But when you cannot afford or find a teacher, practice every day online by yourself, and you'll be making progress. So yeah, thanks again. Tune in next time.